Hey everyone, today I'm going to go ahead and show you how to create a Websense web and data endpoint. Currently I'm going to be using version 7.8.3 to do this, which is endpoint version 1911. Now this tutorial should work for past versions as well. You may however not have all the feature sets available as the newest versions have. So just keep that in mind if you're using this tutorial for an older version of the endpoint. But overall, the instruction set and the methodology should be almost exactly the same when creating your endpoint. First, I want to go ahead and start off by saying if there's anything in this tutorial that you have more questions on or need to find some more information on, you can always contact your local Websense support engineer or your local Websense sales team. I'm sure they'd be glad to help you, or your trusted partner. Also, check out our Websense support site. So it's very easy to find information. You just click on the support tab like I just did right here, and you literally type in like you would any normal Google search. So I want to find information on the endpoint. I just type endpoint in and hit search. And immediately I get a lot of information. Now I want to narrow this down, let's say, to web security, and I have Web Security Gateway Anywhere. That would be my on-prem proxy plus hybrid deployment. I can click on that, and I can narrow it down even to the specific version that I'm looking for. And here we go for version 7.8.x. Here's a lot of information on the newest endpoints. So this is a very quick way to find information that, like I said, may not be in this tutorial, or if you just want a little bit more information on the endpoint, go ahead and go here, do your search, and I'm sure you'll be able to find what you're looking for. So we can go ahead and start. First, I want to preface that I'm currently creating this endpoint, and I believe I said it earlier, on version 7.8.3. It's going to be the newest web endpoint. And I'm going to be using the newest version of our Websense Endpoint Package Builder. So I'm going to go ahead and start by using the Package Builder to create an endpoint. Now something I want to note is that whenever you log in to your Triton Manager server, which is where you should be logging into to create your endpoint packages, what you want to do is log into it with the account that you use as your service account for all your Websense functions. So for example, on this server right here, if I go into my services, you'll quickly see that my Websense services, most of them are running under the account SVC Websense, which you can also see in the top right hand corner. This is an account I use when I do any and everything Websense. So anything on this server that I'm doing that regards a Websense product or is involved in the installation of a Websense product, I always use that account. It's always best practice. Okay, so I left this window open to kind of show you the path to where the Websense Endpoint Package Builder is located. Now there's actually two ways you can build a Websense Web Endpoint package, and one way you can build a Websense Data Endpoint package. The Websense Web Endpoint can actually be located in two different places. One is in this Websense Endpoint Package Builder, which is located in your program files, your Websense directory. Then you navigate to Web Security, DTF Agent, and Remote Filtering Agent Pack. You also, however, have the option when you log in to your Websense Triton installation. Go ahead and show you this, to download the endpoint from that location as well. Now, one thing to look out for is when you do download it from your Websense install, from the Triton console by going to Settings, Hybrid Configuration, and I believe it is under hybrid user identification. If you click on Deploy Web Endpoint manually, and you can see that that's checked right there. When I expand that, there's an option to select View Web Endpoint Files. I can download those from this location right here. Now, sometimes you want to make sure that this version located right here is the latest version of the endpoint. In this case, it is in version 7.8.3. Just something to look out for. So if you want to know what the latest version is of the endpoint, just to verify, you can always go on to the website, go to the support like I showed you earlier, type in endpoint, and you should be able to find under the release notes documentation what the latest version is. So this is one method to get the web endpoint, and then the other was, like I said earlier, using the endpoint package builder that we have here. Okay. It doesn't matter with which method you use. The deployment at the very end may be slightly different, but same functionality both ways. And I'm actually going to show you how to create a package using both methodologies. So, first we're going to go ahead and use the endpoint package builder, which honestly I prefer. I feel like it's easier to create an endpoint this way. It creates a nice executable file for you that you can deploy via SMS, SCCM, anything, any deployment method you like. So we'll first start out by right-clicking on the endpoint package builder and running as an administrator. And we'll go ahead and select yes. I want to run that as an administrator. It's extracting. Alright, now you get this nice UI screen that pretty much gives you all the options as far as creating your web endpoint. So what do I want to create today? Well, I wanted to show you how to create a web and data endpoint. And obviously these are going to be the exact same as creating them individually. So if I were to only check one box, I would only see the screen prompts for the web endpoint client. If I were just to check the data endpoint box, I would only see the screen prompts for the data endpoint client. I'm going to do them both just so you can see what both look like, but just note you can create one or the other. Or you can create a combined package if you are a Websense web security gateway and data security endpoint customer. So first thing we'll do here is I selected, I'm going to create both. Essentially, like I said, it's the same UI screen. It's just going to walk me through prompts for both data endpoint and the web security endpoint. So I'll go ahead and select next. You can select which operating system you want to create the endpoint for. In this case, I'm going to create it for Windows 64-bit machines. This is a temporary password used in case you create your endpoint and it is not able to sync to your manager in time to pull the anti-tampering password back. This is the password you would use to uninstall. So I'm just going to make this Websense 1 for now. And you'll see that later in the instructions that you would look up on our support site on how to uninstall a Websense endpoint. You'd see that there's a section in there where you can put in the uninstall password, and that's what you're inputting here. So make sure you document this if you use it. So you can see right there. Okay, and generally in most environments you would want to protect the installation directory from modification or deletion. This does not allow your users to be able to modify or delete that directory at all. I definitely recommend checking this box unless you highly trust your end users. Go ahead and hit next. Alright, now it's just asking where the default installation folder should be when you create or when you install the endpoint. I always leave it as default, so it's going to install under Program Files, Websense Endpoint on the end user's machine. Now, if you have a special directory on the end user's machines that you want this installed in, you can specify a custom path right here. So we'll go ahead and hit next again. And now we're going to go ahead and go into, it's going to start with the data security settings for this. So right away, because I'm creating it on my manager machine, and the endpoint assumes that I am, it automatically populates this with the IP address of the manager that I'm on right now. Something that I'd like to point out is that in the majority of data security installations, you would have a separate endpoint server, which is normally what this IP address would be. This feature right here, it's a pretty cool feature. What it does is it allows you to set up an internal server that these endpoints can receive automatic updates from. This is generally used if your company wants to still incorporate the auto update feature, but wants to control what version of the endpoint they would like their endpoints to update to. So you'll hit next. And then you have the option to put it in interactive or stealth mode. Stealth mode completely hides the icon in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, so your users cannot see that, and they don't even know it's really running and the endpoint is running on the machine at all. Or you can put it in interactive mode. Most of my clients like to leave it in interactive mode. That allows the end user to see that you do have a data security endpoint on the machine, and it also offers a little bit more flexible functionality as far as checking the endpoint status, making sure it's working correctly, the ability to view any error messages. If there is a reason to bypass the endpoint, it allows that to happen in a much easier fashion when it's in interactive mode. So these are two things that you can kind of test and play around with in your lab environments, but I usually recommend, and most of my customers use, the interactive mode. And it also wants to know what type of mode you wanted to deploy the endpoint software on each machine as. And you have the option for Windows machines between full and discovery. Generally, 99% of the time, my endpoint customers deploy it as full. Like I said, that just allows the full functionality in the endpoint. Otherwise, they can function as discovery-only endpoints. Go ahead and hit next. Okay, now we're getting into the web proxy settings. Okay, so if you have to just select a data endpoint earlier, you would have only seen the screens we saw a second ago. If you would have only clicked on web, you would have started out with this screen. And like I said, because I selected both, we're going through both of the settings, because essentially this is going to create a package that has both of the web endpoint and the data endpoint combined. So here you want to enter your specific pack file string, and you can find this in two locations. Now this depends if you're a cloud endpoint customer or a Web Security Gateway Anywhere customer. I'm going to go ahead and show you both methods where you can find this string right here. And by the way, you can use the package creator for the cloud endpoint, web endpoints, as well as the WSGA or on-prem proxy endpoints. So we'll go ahead and close that out, and I'll show you where you can find that your specific proxy pack string. So let's see, under user access. So if you log into your Triton Manager, go to Web Security Settings, Hybrid Configuration, and User Access. This is the specific pack file string right here over 8082, which is the one you want to populate in that UI text box. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that out, navigate back to my Triton Manager server screen where I'm configuring the endpoint. I'm going to go ahead and paste that specific string. Basically, that signifies that this is the specific pack file string associated with my account. Alright, so once that's in there, you have one more option on this page, and that's the setting right here. And this is actually brand new to Websense Endpoint version 1911, or the 7.8.2 in beyond releases of our Websense endpoint. And essentially what this shows, or what this allows you to do, is manually disable the proxy settings. This is for end users generally that travel a lot. So most of the time when I see this used, a company has traveling consultants, and sometimes when they're on site with customers, they're not able to get out to the web without going through their on-site proxies. If that is the case, then what they can do is they can simply click or right-click on the Web Endpoint icon that will be present in the bottom right-hand corner of their screen, and they'll get a disable option, and they're able to disable the endpoint and then go into the Internet Explorer LAN settings and proxy settings and manually disable the proxy pack file settings. So that's what this option does right here. I really only recommend incorporating this if you actually have a very specific use case for it. You do not have to deploy this out to every user in your company, though. So let's say maybe you only have 10 traveling users that need that capability. You would just create simply 2 different versions of the endpoint using this package creator. And one would have this enabled and one would not. And the one that has this setting enabled, you would deploy to those 10 users that need that manual override feature. So for my environment, I'm not going to enable that. I don't need that functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And now it's simply asking me where do I want to save this endpoint package. So I want to save it to my desktop. And you can save this wherever you want. Okay, and finish. And you're going to see in 1 second an endpoint is going to be created and pinned up to the desktop here, and I'll get an endpoint created successfully. Okay, the installation package has been saved. Hit OK. And here's my new endpoint. Now, to deploy the endpoint, you have a couple options. This is the endpoint package. Like I said earlier, there's 2 different ways to deploy a web endpoint. So the endpoint package has to be deployed using, if you deploy it manually to individual laptops, there are certain deployment strings that you would use to successfully deploy this. And I'll go ahead and show you what those are real quick on the screen. So for a package install, this would be the syntax that you would use to deploy the endpoint on the user's machine. Now, one thing to note is you want to open, if you're deploying this manually, you would open command prompt on the end user's machine, but run command prompt as an administrator, and then proceed to enter this install command. Now, one thing you need to know is what's called the WSContext string. This can be obtained from your Triton Manager. I'm going to go ahead and show you that again. And if we go to Hybrid User Identification, when I click on Deploy Web Endpoint Manually, you can see the WSContext string is right here. You don't need the -1 at the end if that shows up in your instance. It works with or without that. Doesn't matter though. So this is a string you would enter in this portion right here of the command line. So where I have all X's, that's going to be specific to your installation. Okay, and below you can see I show the command also to remove the web endpoint. And this is where you would enter the anti-tampering password. Now you can also just go in to your regular control panel, uninstall programs, and you'll see the web endpoint there, and you can just click uninstall there as well, and that will do the same thing. But it will ask you for that anti-tampering password that we entered in earlier when we created the endpoint package. Okay, so that's one way to create a web or a data endpoint or a web and data endpoint package. There's an alternative method as well. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to basically show you where to obtain those. So one method is deploy the endpoint manually, view Web Endpoint files where we were before, and you can select in here which version of the Web Endpoint you're wanting to deploy. Okay. And from here you can go ahead and just click on it, and it will ask you if you want to save the Web Endpoint file. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this. Let's see. Alright, I'm going to save it there. And I'm going to go ahead and click on shouldn't take too long to complete downloading that. Okay, looks like that download's complete. So I'm going to pull that onto my Triton Manager like we did earlier. Okay, and then I'm going to extract it to the same location. Like I said, this is just another way to create the Web Endpoint. You have two different methods. Now you saw that I downloaded that from my Web Security Gateway Anywhere instance. Now you can also download this if you have a cloud account. And that will be located here in the Cloud Security Portal. And I'll go ahead and show you in 1 second where to navigate to download those endpoint packages. So it's pretty simple. You just click on Web Security if you're a Web Security customer or a Cloud Web Security customer, and you navigate down to Endpoint. Okay? And the nice thing is about this is right here you immediately have your own WSContext code that's displayed, as well as the most current update or currently updated endpoint versions, along with the release notes as well, so you're able to see what exactly has been released with each endpoint. These release notes are also available in the Web Security Gateway Anywhere Web Endpoint download screen as well. So that's where you obtain the endpoint on the cloud, and that's how you obtain it if you have Web Security Gateway Anywhere. Alright, so one important thing to consider when you're creating an endpoint using just the Web Endpoint Creator is the modification of the HWS config file. Now I'm going to go ahead and open that with, I use Notepad++ at home. One thing that you want to make sure you modify is this particular portion right here. So the pack file URL. Remember earlier how we went in and went to user access and found this specific pack file string? You always want to use your specific pack file string there. So what I'll do is I'd copy this out, and I would go into this HWS config file. I change that to my pack file string that's specific to my account, and save. Okay, this string for the cloud, I'll show you where that is located. So if you have a cloud account, the string should be located in your policies page under your default policy. Really, any policy that you click on, it should display this, but this is where you can locate your specific pack file string if you are a hosted web security customer. So, let's see. Now that we have that modified on the Triton Manager server with that string, I'm going to go ahead and I already saved that WSConfig file. Okay. All right. So once that's that WSConfig is configured with that pack file string, all you would do at that point is utilize this particular command line install function. And this is all on our website. Like I said in the very beginning, under the support, you can find all the information on how to install the endpoint. You basically search our support site just like you would any other Google search you would do. So just type in endpoint install and narrow down the version, and I'm sure you will find information on exactly how to install the endpoint or remove it, whatever you're doing at the time. Note that this also requires that WSContext string, and we already located that for WSGA, and for the cloud environment, I believe we did as well, but I'll go ahead and show you one more time. That is actually right here under the endpoint selection in the settings tab, and it's located right there, the WSContext string. All right, so that pretty much concludes the Websense endpoint creation and deployment scenarios and methodologies we go through. If you have any questions, like I said, please contact your local Websense team or your trusted reseller, or check out our support page. Our support page has a lot of good information on it. All right, guys, thanks for viewing. I really appreciate it.